Have you ever thought about becoming your husband's stepmother? Because that's exactly what I did when I discovered he was cheating on me. And today I'm going to tell you everything. Good morning, my dears. I'm Eleanor Fontaine. I'm 82 years old, and today I'm sharing a story from my life that few people know. A story of pain, revenge, and finally, healing. But before I begin, if you're watching now, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to receive more stories like this one. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing that people from all across America are listening to my stories. Now, let's get to what matters. This story happened in 1965 when I was 22 years old. Back then, things were very different. A divorced woman was seen as a failure, a disgrace to her family. I grew up hearing that we should do anything to maintain our marriage, even if it meant enduring all kinds of humiliation. I was young, beautiful, and had married Arthur Mitchell at 18. He was the son of the owner of the largest textile factory in our town, Riverdale Springs, in rural Pennsylvania. We had a beautiful house, we were part of high society, and from the outside, it seemed like we had a perfect marriage. I kept our home immaculate. I was a good wife, as the customs of the time demanded. Arthur was a handsome, charming man, the kind that made all women look when he entered a room. At first, I felt like the luckiest woman in the world that he had chosen me. Me, the daughter of a simple civil servant, married to the heir of the Mitchell family. It seemed like a fairy tale, but like all real stories, mine wasn't a fairy tale. After a few years of marriage, Arthur started coming home late. He said they were business meetings, important dinners with clients. I believed him, of course. What reason did I have to doubt? Until that Thursday in May, I'll never forget. I was tidying our bedroom, organizing clothes the laundress had brought. I picked up Arthur's gray suit jacket to hang in the closet and smelled a different scent, a perfume that wasn't mine. I was intrigued. I started examining it more carefully and found something in the inner pocket. It was a pink envelope, delicate. Inside was a handwritten letter with elegant feminine handwriting. My darling, last night was wonderful. I can't wait to see you again. It continued with details that made me sit on the bed breathless as if I'd been punched in the stomach. The letter was signed by someone named Eleanor. I kept searching and found 3 more letters hidden in a shoebox at the back of the closet, all from the same woman, all detailing meetings that happened while I was at home, believing my husband's lies. I spent the entire day in that room, reading and rereading those letters, crying until I had no more tears. When Arthur arrived around 8 p.m., I was sitting in the living room with the letters spread out on the coffee table. "What's this?" he asked, his face pale as he recognized the envelopes. "You know very well what it is," I replied, my voice hoarse from crying. "I want you to explain who Eleanor is." I thought he would deny it, make excuses, maybe even beg for forgiveness. But what happened next showed me who Arthur really was. He laughed, a cold, mocking laugh that chilled me to the bone. "Eleanor is a real woman," he said, loosening his tie and pouring himself a whiskey as if we were having any ordinary conversation. "She gives me what you never knew how to give." "How could you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "After everything we've built together, 7 years of marriage." That's when he said the words that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. He looked at me with contempt and said, "If you were woman enough, I wouldn't need to look elsewhere. The problem is you, it always has been." At that moment, something inside me died. Eleanor, the naive girl who believed in love, in happily ever after, ceased to exist in that living room. "I want a divorce," I said, struggling to maintain my dignity. He laughed again. "Divorce in 1965? You think any judge will rule in your favor without evidence of physical abuse? You're more foolish than I thought." He was right. Unfortunately, back then, divorce wasn't what we know today. The law didn't favor women, especially against influential men like Arthur Mitchell. "Then I'll leave," I said, standing up. "I won't continue living this lie." That's when he showed his true face. If you walk out that door, you leave with nothing. This house is mine. The furniture is mine. Even the clothes you're wearing were bought with my money. But I'm entitled to half of everything, I argued desperately. Prove it, he challenged. My father is friends with the judge, the sheriff, the mayor. Who do you think they'll side with? The daughter of George the clerk, or the son of Colonel Mitchell? I started crying again, realizing the trap I was in. I was a prisoner in that marriage, with no way out. Arthur finished his whiskey, put the glass on the table, and said coldly, "But since you insist, you can go right now. Take a suitcase, put your personal things in it, and leave. The rest stays." "Where am I supposed to go in the middle of the night?" I asked in panic. "Not my problem," he replied, going upstairs to the bedroom. "When I come back from my shower, I don't want to see you here anymore." That's how, at 22, I found myself on the street with a small suitcase containing some clothes, my documents, and almost no money. I couldn't go back to my parents' house. My father had died 2 years before, and my mother lived with my sister in another city. Besides, the shame of admitting my marriage had failed was too great. I walked through the dark streets of Riverdale Springs aimlessly, crying silently. I ended up knocking on the door of my friend Julia, a seamstress who lived in a simple neighborhood. She took me in without asking questions, offered her sofa that night, and the next day helped me set up the small back room of her house. "You can stay as long as you need," Julia said, with the kindness that was always her trademark. "Nobody deserves to go through what you're going through." The days that followed were the hardest of my life. To survive, I started helping Julia with sewing. I learned quickly. I had a good hand for the work. I also washed and ironed clothes for others. The money was little, but it was enough to support myself. At night, alone in that small room, I would cry until I fell asleep. It wasn't just about the betrayal, but the humiliation, the feeling of failure, the injustice of it all. How could I have given everything to that marriage and end up like this? Without a home, without money, without dignity. The people in town, of course, talked. Rumors ran wild. Some said I had cheated on Arthur, others that I had stolen his money. No one would believe that the charming son of Colonel Mitchell could be the villain of the story. It was easier to blame the woman, as always. I avoided leaving the house, except to deliver sewing work or look for more work. I didn't want to face the looks, the whispers. Riverdale Springs was too small a town to hide in. One day, after almost 3 months living like this, Julia came with news that would change the course of my story. "Did you hear? Arthur's cousin, Marianne, is getting married next month. They say it's going to be the wedding of the year. The entire Mitchell family will be there, including his father, Colonel Alexander, who's coming from the city especially for the celebration." Alexander Mitchell. The name awakened something in me. I had seen him only once, at our wedding. A stern man, widowed for many years, who barely spoke to his son throughout the ceremony. I remembered the stories Arthur told about his father, how distant they were, how they fought over the family business, how the old man was controlling and never approved of anything his son did. It was at that moment, hearing Julia talk about the wedding, that an idea began to form in my head. A terrible idea that scared me at first, but grew stronger each day. What if I could get revenge on Arthur in the worst possible way? What if I could make him feel the same pain, the same humiliation I felt? That's when I started planning something that would forever change the fate of the Mitchell family and my own fate. After that conversation with Julia, something changed inside me. The pain was still there, of course, but now there was another feeling growing, taking space, determination. I wouldn't just be another woman destroyed by marriage, tossed aside as if she were worth nothing. I would prove my worth, and I would do it in the way that would hurt Arthur the most. The more I thought about the situation, the more I remembered the stories Arthur told about his father, how Alexander despised him, how he never approved of his decisions, how the two barely spoke for years because of old fights about the family business. A bold idea began to form in my mind. What if I sought out the very person Arthur most feared and respected? What if I made an alliance with his own father? It was risky, of course. Alexander could throw me out the moment I identified myself. After all, I was his son's ex-wife, and families like the Mitchells tended to unite against outsiders. But something told me he wouldn't react that way. I remembered the only meeting we had at my wedding to Arthur. The cold look Alexander gave his son throughout the ceremony, how he avoided hugging him at the reception, how he left early without saying a proper goodbye. Nothing to lose, I thought to myself. I've already lost everything anyway. I discovered that Alexander was staying at the family mansion on the outskirts of town. Every month, he came from New York to supervise the business for a few days. The property was isolated, surrounded by a large garden, with an imposing gate guarded by a caretaker. It wouldn't be easy to gain access to him. I decided to write a brief, direct letter, without beating around the bush. I explained who I was, and said only that I needed to talk to him about a matter that would interest us both. I asked that, if he agreed to receive me, he send a response to Julia's address. For 3 days, I lived in anguish, waiting. Every time someone knocked at the door, my heart raced. Julia noticed my agitation but didn't ask questions, one of the qualities I most admired in her. On the morning of the 4th day, a boy delivered an envelope. Inside was a simple card with the firm handwriting of a businessman. Thursday, 3 p.m. The back entrance will be open. When Thursday arrived, I dressed carefully. Nothing flashy, just a sober gray dress and a light coat. I pinned my hair in a discreet bun. I wore minimal makeup. I wanted to look serious, trustworthy, not a desperate woman seeking charity. The Mitchell mansion was even more imposing up close. I walked around the high wall until I found the small back gate that led to the gardens. It was unlocked, as promised. I crossed the well-maintained garden, passing rose bushes and fruit trees until I reached the kitchen door. Before I could knock, it opened. "Come in," said a middle-aged maid. "The master is waiting in the library." I followed through the corridors of the house, feeling small amid the expensive paintings and antique furniture. The library was at the end of a long corridor. The maid knocked discreetly, opened the door, and gestured for me to enter. Then she withdrew, closing the door behind me. Alexander Mitchell was standing by the window, looking out at the garden. He was a tall man, still imposing despite his 65 years. Well-cut gray hair, impeccable suit, rigid posture. He turned slowly when I entered. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said with a slight nod. "Or should I say, Miss Fontaine now?" "As you prefer," I replied, keeping my voice firm despite my nervousness. He indicated a chair. "Sit down. Would you like some tea?" I accepted with a nod. He served 2 cups from a teapot that was already on the table, moving with the precision of someone accustomed to command. "Your letter intrigued me," he finally said, sitting across from me. "You said we have common interests. What would they be?" I took a deep breath. It was the moment of truth. "Arthur," I replied simply. "I believe neither of us harbors very positive feelings toward him at this moment." A shadow crossed Alexander's face. For an instant, I thought I had made a terrible mistake. Then, to my surprise, a small smile appeared at the corner of his lips. "My son has always had a gift for making enemies," he commented, taking a sip of tea. "What did he do to deserve your contempt?" I told him everything. The betrayal, the letters, the cruel words, how I was kicked out of the house with nothing, how I was living now. I spoke without tears, without self-pity, just stating the facts. Alexander listened in silence, his face impassive, but I noticed a gleam of anger growing in his eyes. "Typical," he said when I finished. "Arthur has always been like this, irresponsible, ungrateful, since childhood." He stood up, walked to a shelf, and picked up a framed photograph. It was a young woman, very beautiful, with a baby in her arms. "My wife Clarissa, with Arthur as a newborn," he explained. "She died when he was 8 years old, pneumonia. Left me alone to raise a spoiled boy who only wanted to spend the money I sweated to earn." He carefully put the photograph back on the shelf. "When he was 20, he wanted to join the family business. I gave him a chance. I put him in charge of managing one of our stores. In 6 months, he nearly bankrupted it. He spent more than he sold. He treated the employees like his personal servants. Alexander sat back down, his eyes now fixed on me. 5 years ago, I discovered he was diverting money from the company to cover gambling debts. That was the last straw. I cut off his access to the family accounts, reduced his allowance to the minimum necessary to maintain appearances. Told him that if he wanted more, he should work honestly. I was beginning to understand why Arthur never talked about his father, why the two were so distant. It wasn't just a difference in personalities. There were deep grudges, family secrets. "Why are you telling me all this?" I asked. "Because you came here for some reason," he replied. "And I suspect it wasn't just to vent about my ungrateful son. It was my cue, the moment to reveal my crazy plan, which until then I wasn't even sure I would go through with." "I'm here because I have a proposal," I said, leaning slightly forward. "A way for us to get revenge on Arthur, to make him feel the same kind of humiliation he made us feel." Alexander raised an intrigued eyebrow. "I'm listening." "His cousin Marianne is getting married next month. The whole family will be there, including Arthur." "Yes, I received the invitation," he confirmed. "What if you showed up at that wedding with me, as your new wife?" Alexander's eyes widened slightly. For a moment, I thought I had gone too far. Then, to my surprise, he began to laugh. A genuine laugh that seemed not to have come from that chest for a long time. "What a diabolical mind you have, my young lady," he said when he finally calmed down. "Arthur would go crazy seeing his father married to the woman he discarded as if she were worth nothing." "We wouldn't have to actually get married," I explained quickly. "Just pretend, announce our marriage during the party, let the scandal spread, and then, when the damage is done, each goes our own way." Alexander studied me for a long moment, as if evaluating a risky investment. "Why would I do this?" he finally asked. "What would be my benefit, besides irritating my son? Something I naturally do just by existing." "Because this wouldn't just irritate him, it would destroy him, hit him exactly at his weak point, his pride. Imagine Arthur's humiliation in front of all of society when they discovered that his own father married his ex-wife. A woman he discarded as inferior would now be his stepmother." I saw the gleam of satisfaction in Alexander's eyes. It was clear that the idea of publicly humiliating his son gave him an almost perverse pleasure. "Besides," I continued, realizing he was almost convinced, "this would be a way to show him that you still have control, that you can take anything from him, even his ex-wife, if you so desire." Alexander stood up and walked slowly around the library, his hands crossed behind his back. I could almost see the gears turning in his calculating mind. "It would have to be convincing," he said finally. "No one can suspect it's a farce. We can say we met recently, that it was love at first sight," I suggested, feeling a shiver as I used the word love in such a context devoid of real feelings. "And afterwards, when the scandal passes, we announce it didn't work out, that we decided to go our separate ways. By then, the damage will already be done." Alexander stopped in front of me, extending his hand like someone closing a business deal. "We have a pact then. I'll humiliate my son using his own weapons against him. Arrogance will be his downfall." I shook his hand, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. I was making a deal with the devil, perhaps, but it was a devil who hated the same person I did. "We'll need some details to make this credible," said Alexander, already planning like a military strategist. "You'll have to move to my house in New York. We'll buy a new wardrobe for you. Jewelry, perfumes, everything a wife of mine should have. And we'll need to rehearse our story, how we met, how the supposed marriage was." "We don't have much time," I observed. "Marianne's wedding is a month away." "Time enough," he assured, with the confidence of someone accustomed to making what he wants happen. "In fact, I think it would be even more impactful if we didn't announce anything beforehand. Just showed up together, you wearing an impressive wedding ring. The shock would be greater." "I agree," I said. "The bigger the surprise, the greater the impact." That same day, I left Julia's house. I told her only that I had found an opportunity in New York, that I would be working for a rich family. I'm not proud of having lied to someone who helped me so much, but I knew she would never approve of my revenge plan. The next few weeks were a complete transformation. I moved to Alexander's mansion in New York, an imposing house in the Upper East Side. He kept his word, hired seamstresses to make my new wardrobe, bought expensive jewelry, taught me the ways of New York high society. During this time, I got to know Alexander Mitchell better. He wasn't an easy man, had a difficult temperament, was demanding, accustomed to giving orders and being obeyed without question. But he was also intelligent, cultured, and, in his own way, fair. He never treated me with disrespect or as inferior, something that surprised me. At night we would dine together, and he would tell me stories from the past. How he built his textile empire from scratch, the difficulties he faced, how his wife's death left him bitter and focused only on work. He spoke little of Arthur, but when he did, it was always with a mixture of disappointment and contained anger. I gave him every opportunity, he told me one night. The best education, the best schools, and he wasted it all. He never had the discipline necessary to take over the family business. I now understood why Arthur had grown up so self-centered, so superficial. On one side, an absent father, demanding, impossible to please. On the other, the family fortune and name, which opened all doors for him without having to make any effort. As the days passed and our plan took shape, I began to feel a strange complicity with Alexander. It wasn't friendship, much less something romantic. It was the union of two hearts hurt by the same man, two people who found in resentment a common goal. Finally, the big day arrived, Marianne Mitchell's wedding to a local banker's son. The ceremony would be at the town's main church, followed by a reception in the gardens of the family mansion. The entire event promised to be the social event of the year in the small town. On the morning of the wedding, I looked at myself in the mirror of the guest room at the Mitchell mansion and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. I wore an emerald green silk dress, elegant and sophisticated. My hair, once dull, was now perfectly styled. On my finger, a diamond ring that certainly cost a fortune. "It's just borrowed," Alexander had explained, to give credibility to our story. When I came down the stairs, Alexander was waiting for me in the hall, impeccable in his dark suit. He looked me up and down and nodded in approval. "Perfect," he said. "Today my son will learn not to underestimate others." We got into his imported car and headed to the church. On the way, I mentally rehearsed the plan. We would arrive discreetly. We would sit in the middle rows, visible but not immediately drawing attention. After the ceremony, during the reception, Alexander would make a toast to the newlyweds and casually introduce me as his new wife. My heart was beating so hard I thought everyone could hear it when we entered the already nearly full church. Several glances turned toward us, or rather, toward Alexander, an important figure who rarely appeared at social events. Few recognized me immediately. I looked so different from the Eleanor of months ago. We sat as planned. Discreetly, I scanned the place with my eyes, looking for Arthur. I found him 3 rows ahead, on the opposite side, accompanied by an elegant blonde woman, probably the Eleanor from the letters. The ceremony passed like a blur before my eyes. I couldn't focus on the priest's words, the music, the vows of the bride and groom. I only thought about the moment to come, about Arthur's reaction when he discovered the truth. Finally, the ceremony ended, and everyone headed to the Mitchell mansion, where the gardens had been decorated for the reception. Elegant tables scattered across the lawn, waiters circulating with glasses of champagne, a small orchestra playing soft music. Alexander and I positioned ourselves strategically near the buffet, from where we could observe the arrival of the guests. Arthur entered with his companion, greeting people, laughing, displaying that superficial charm that once won me over. "Ready?" Alexander whispered, discreetly holding my elbow. I nodded, feeling a wave of adrenaline course through me. It was now or never. Alexander took 2 glasses of champagne from a passing waiter, handed me one, and we began to walk toward the center of the garden, where most of the guests were concentrated. The moment of truth had arrived, and with it, the revenge I had waited for so long. As we walked through the ornate garden of the Mitchell mansion, each step brought me closer to the moment I had planned so much. The emerald green silk dress rustled softly around my ankles. The diamond ring weighed on my finger. Alexander walked beside me with his usual rigid posture, but his eyes had a different gleam, the gleam of someone about to win a battle. We didn't have to look hard for Arthur. He was at the center of a small group, telling some story that made everyone laugh. It had always been like that. The center of attention, the charmer. The blonde woman at his side laughed louder than everyone, a possessive hand on his arm. I immediately recognized her as Eleanor, the lover from the perfumed letters. Seeing her there, occupying the place that was once mine, should have hurt me. Surprisingly, I felt only a slight indifference. "Let's go," whispered Alexander, guiding me toward the group. Our approach was noticed gradually. First, one of the men saw Alexander and made a respectful greeting. Then another. The conversations diminished until silence settled in. That's when Arthur finally turned and saw us. The effect was immediate and devastating, exactly as we had planned. His face went through a sequence of emotions in a matter of seconds: surprise, confusion, recognition, and finally, incredulous horror. His eyes went from me to Alexander, then to our close hands, to the ring on my finger. "Father," he managed to say, his voice strangely high-pitched, "what does this mean?" Alexander smiled, that cold, calculating smile I knew well by now. "Arthur, good to see you. Let me introduce— but you already know each other, don't you, Eleanor? She's now my wife." The silence that followed was almost palpable. You could hear only the distant clinking of cutlery and the soft music of the orchestra, completely oblivious to the drama unfolding. "Your wife," repeated Arthur, as if he didn't understand the meaning of the words. "Yes, we got married 2 weeks ago. An intimate ceremony, just for close family. You would have been invited, of course, but considering the circumstances, we thought it better not to." Arthur looked at me, his eyes wide in disbelief. "You and my father." I held his gaze, feeling a strange calmness. "Yes, Arthur. Life comes full circle, doesn't it?" The woman beside him, Eleanor, seemed completely lost. "Arthur, who is she? What's happening?" But Arthur didn't answer. He continued staring at us as if we were apparitions. "She's his ex-wife," replied one of the men in the group, clearly pleased to spread the gossip. "The one he left a few months ago." Eleanor paled, finally understanding the situation. She looked at me with a mixture of shock and shame. That's when Arthur seemed to wake from his trance. His face, previously pale, was now red with fury. "Is this some kind of sick joke?" he spat, turning toward us. "What do you think you're doing, Father? And you, Eleanor, how could you stoop to this level?" "Stoop?" I repeated, keeping my voice calm despite my racing heart. "Curious that you use that word. Isn't that what you did to me? Degraded me when you kicked me out of the house as if I were trash, when you said I wasn't woman enough for you?" The guests around began to whisper, their gazes alternating between the three of us, drinking in every word of that unexpected scandal. "You've always been weak, Arthur," intervened Alexander, his voice laden with contempt. "A man who doesn't know how to value a good woman doesn't deserve to have her. Fortunately, I knew how to recognize what you wasted. It was like throwing gasoline on a fire." Arthur advanced, his fists clenched, stopping inches from his father. "You did this on purpose?" he shouted, completely forgetting where we were. "Just to humiliate me, like you've always done my whole life." Alexander didn't back up 1 millimeter. "If you feel humiliated, that's your problem. I'm just living my life with the woman I chose." "The woman I chose first," retorted Arthur, his voice rising more and more. "My wife." "Ex-wife," I corrected, feeling a bitter satisfaction seeing his lack of control. "You made it very clear that you didn't want me anymore, remember? You said I wasn't enough for you." So that's it? He turned to me, his bloodshot eyes. A cheap revenge? Seducing my own father to get at me? Don't be ridiculous, intervened Alexander. Eleanor didn't need to seduce anyone. We met by chance after you abandoned her. We talked, discovered affinities. Affinities? Arthur laughed, a harsh sound without humor. What affinities could you have besides hating me? Unlike you, your father knows how to value an intelligent and dedicated woman, I replied, maintaining the calm tone that I knew would irritate him even more. He gave me the respect you were never capable of giving. Arthur shook his head as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Then, suddenly, his expression changed. A malicious smile appeared on his lips. I understand now. It's for the money, isn't it? I always knew you were ambitious, Eleanor, but I never imagined you would go this far, marrying an old man just to access the family fortune. That hit me harder than expected. Even knowing our marriage was a farce, the insinuation that I would be a fortune hunter hurt me. Before I could respond, Alexander stepped forward. Be careful what you say, boy, he warned, his voice dangerously low. You're insulting my wife and, indirectly, me too, by suggesting I'm fool enough to be manipulated. You are a fool, exploded Arthur. She's using you just like she used me. That's what she does. She manipulates men to get what she wants. That's when Eleanor, until then silent, pulled Arthur's arm. Let's go, she whispered, clearly embarrassed by the scene. Everyone is watching. He ignored her, his eyes fixed on the two of us. You always wanted to destroy me, didn't you, Father? Ever since Mom died, you've always blamed me for her leaving. You always thought I wasn't worthy of the Mitchell name. That caught Alexander by surprise. I saw a flash of pain cross his face before the mask of coldness returned to its place. Don't be absurd. Your mother died of pneumonia. Nobody blamed you for that. Liar, shouted Arthur, completely out of control now. You always said that if she hadn't worn herself out so much taking care of me when I was sick, she wouldn't have been vulnerable, wouldn't have caught that pneumonia. You look at me and see the boy who killed your beloved wife. A horrified silence fell over the guests. That revelation was clearly something that had never been openly discussed, a family trauma buried for decades. Alexander's face was stony, but I noticed his hands trembled slightly. That's in the past, he finally said. We're talking about the present, about the fact that you treated your wife like garbage, and now you're upset that she found happiness away from you. Happiness? Arthur let out a bitter laugh. You really think she's with you for happiness? She's getting revenge on me, and you're just an instrument in that revenge. I looked at the faces around us, dozens of guests, all absorbing every word of that family drama. I felt a wave of nausea. This had gone too far. The plan was to humiliate Arthur, not expose deep family traumas, not turn an innocent person's wedding into a battlefield. Please stop, I said, my voice louder than I intended. This is neither the place nor the time for this. Both ignored me, trapped in their own private war. You never gave me a chance, continued Arthur, decades of resentment overflowing. I was never good enough. I never did anything right in your eyes. And now this? Stealing my wife just to prove you can? I didn't steal anything, retorted Alexander, equally altered. You threw her away as if she were worth nothing. I just recognized the value that you, in your arrogance and stupidity, weren't capable of seeing. Stop, I shouted, no longer able to bear it. Enough, both of you. My shout cut through the air, making them momentarily silent. All eyes turned to me. This has gone too far, I continued, suddenly feeling exhausted. We're ruining Marianne's wedding. This should be her day, not a stage for airing the family's dirty laundry. I looked at Arthur, then at Alexander, and finally at all the open-mouthed guests around. The truth is that there is no marriage, I confessed, taking off the ring and placing it in Alexander's hand. It was all an act, a revenge, yes. We planned this together to humiliate Arthur, to make him feel the same way I felt when he cheated on me and kicked me out of the house. The murmurs around increased. Eleanor brought her hand to her mouth, shocked. Arthur stared at us, an expression of disbelief replacing the anger. "You planned this?" he asked, looking from his father to me. "Together?" "Yes," I replied, feeling a strange relief in telling the truth. "Your father contacted me after he found out how you treated me. We decided you deserved a lesson." This was a lie, of course. I had sought out Alexander, not the other way around, but I wanted to preserve some of the old man's dignity, who now suddenly seemed fragile in the face of the public revelation. "I'm leaving," I announced to no one in particular. "I'm sorry for the disturbance, and I'm sorry for the bride and groom who don't deserve to have their special day ruined by this farce." I began to walk toward the exit, feeling the gazes following me. Before I could completely get away, I felt a hand on my arm. It was Arthur. "Why?" he asked, his voice now almost a whisper. "Why do this?" I looked at the man I once loved, that I once swore to spend my entire life with, and felt only emptiness. "Because you destroyed me, Arthur. Not just my heart, but my dignity, my self-esteem. I thought seeing you humiliated would bring me some kind of peace. But now I see I was wrong. And my father, he really agreed to this just to hurt me? Your father has his own grudges against you. Grudges that come from long before I entered your lives. Maybe you should talk to each other for real for the first time." I freed my arm from his grip and continued walking. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see the shocked faces, the judging looks. At that moment, I just wanted distance from that family, from that place, from that life that was never really mine. I took a taxi at the entrance of the mansion and asked to be taken to the bus station. On the way, I removed the expensive makeup, took off the pearl earrings, stored everything in the small purse I carried. I was returning to being just Eleanor Fontaine, without the borrowed glamour of the Mitchells. At the bus station, I bought a ticket for the first bus that would leave. It didn't matter where, as long as it was far from Riverdale Springs. It ended up being to Philadelphia. While waiting to board, sitting on a hard bench with only the clothes on my back and a small purse containing some savings, I felt a strange sense of freedom. The revenge I had planned so much had turned into something different than I imagined. Yes, I had publicly humiliated Arthur, exposed family secrets, caused a scandal that would be talked about for years in the small town. But I didn't feel the satisfaction I expected. Instead, I realized I had become too involved in the psychological games of that dysfunctional family. Alexander and Arthur, father and son, trapped in a cycle of hurt and resentment that came from the mother's death. And I, who should have been just an instrument of revenge, ended up becoming part of that sick family drama. When the bus departed, taking me away from that town and those people, I cried, not from sadness or regret, but from relief. I was finally free, not just from Arthur, but from the anger, from the desire for revenge that had consumed my thoughts for months. I didn't know what awaited me in Philadelphia. I had no plans, no contacts, hardly any money. But I had something much more valuable, the chance to start over, to build a life that was truly mine without being in the shadow of any man. And that's exactly what I did. I arrived in Philadelphia on a Sunday morning with the emerald dress wrinkled from the trip, my feet sore in shoes too elegant for long walks, and only $83 in my pocket, all my savings. The bus station was teeming with people, families reuniting, street vendors announcing their products, and there I was, alone, not knowing a single soul in that big city. For a moment, I felt the weight of reality fall on my shoulders. What was I thinking? A 22-year-old woman with no education, no references, no place to stay in a strange city. Fear tightened my chest, and for an instant I thought about buying a return ticket. Not to Riverdale Springs, of course. I could never show my face there again after the scandal I caused. But maybe to New York, where I could look for Alexander and beg for help. But then I remembered Arthur's look, Alexander's expression, that whole family destroyed by old resentments. No, I wasn't part of that, never was. It was time to face the world on my own. With the little money I had, I rented a tiny room in a boarding house downtown. It was a simple place, clean enough, but far from the luxury I had become accustomed to in the Mitchell house. The bathroom was shared with 3 other tenants, all women alone like me, each with her story, her secrets, her struggles. Already that first day, I understood that I needed to find work quickly. My money would last 2 weeks at most, paying for the room and eating as little as possible. The next morning, I went out into the downtown streets with a single goal: to get any job that could support me. It was harder than I imagined. In 1965, a young woman, alone, without references, aroused more suspicion than compassion. The questions were always the same. Where's your husband? Why did you come to the city alone? Who is your family? After 2 days of closed doors, I got a position as a maid in a small hotel near the boarding house. The work was exhausting, 12 hours a day cleaning rooms, changing sheets, and scrubbing bathrooms. My hands, once soft and well cared for, were soon rough and red from cleaning chemicals. At night, I fell into bed so tired I didn't have the strength to cry. But there was dignity in that honest work. Every dollar I earned was the fruit of my effort, not alms or charity. And more importantly, no one there knew who I was or where I came from. To everyone, I was just Eleanor, the quiet girl who worked hard and didn't get into trouble. In the few free hours I had, I began to frequent the public library. I always liked to read, but in my marriage to Arthur, he devalued this interest. He said I should focus on being a good wife, not on filling my head with ideas. Now, however, I was free to explore any subject that interested me. It was at the library that I met Mrs. Cecilia, a lady in her 60s who worked as a volunteer organizing books. She noticed my interest in novels, and we began to talk about literature. Gradually, those conversations evolved into a genuine friendship, the first I formed in Philadelphia. One Sunday afternoon, 4 months after my arrival in the city, Mrs. Cecilia invited me for tea at her house, a small but cozy apartment in the Rittenhouse Square neighborhood. It was there that I discovered she was the widow of a tailor and had kept her husband's small workshop running after he passed away. "I'm already too old to handle all the orders," she confessed, serving me a piece of cornbread. "I'm thinking of closing the atelier." I then mentioned that I knew how to sew. I wasn't a professional, but I had learned the basics from my mother and improved the skill during the months I spent at Julia's house. "Sewing?" Mrs. Cecilia's eyes sparkled. "Why didn't you say so before, girl? That's exactly the skill I'm looking for." The following week, I left my job at the hotel and started working at Mrs. Cecilia's small atelier. The salary was practically the same, but the work was infinitely more enjoyable. Instead of cleaning other people's dirt, I created, transformed fabrics into clothes, repaired beloved garments, gave new life to old dresses. Mrs. Cecilia was a patient teacher. She taught me techniques I didn't know. She showed me how to handle the professional sewing machine, how to take measurements correctly, how to choose the best fabric for each piece. More than that, she treated me like a daughter, caring about my well-being, encouraging me to move forward. "I don't know what brought you to Philadelphia alone and so young," she said once. "And I won't ask if you don't want to tell, but I know how to recognize when someone is running from something painful. Just remember, no matter how dark the night was, the sun always rises again." Those words touched my heart. For the first time since I left Riverdale Springs, I allowed myself to cry in front of someone. I told her everything. The marriage to Arthur, the betrayal, the humiliation, the revenge I planned with Alexander, the scandal at the wedding. I expected to see judgment in her eyes, but I found only understanding. "Life has these things, my child," she said when I finished my story. "We do what we can with the cards we're dealt. The important thing is to learn from mistakes and move forward." With time, I gained more confidence in my skills as a seamstress. Clients began to specifically ask for me, praising my meticulous work, my eye for detail. I started creating my own pieces, small modifications to traditional models that soon became my signature. A year after my arrival in Philadelphia, Mrs. Cecilia called me for a serious conversation. "I'm getting old, Eleanor," she said with her usual frankness. "My hands aren't as steady. My eyes don't see the details like before. I was thinking of selling the atelier, but now I have a better proposal. I want you to take it over." I was speechless. Take over the atelier. Me, who just over a year ago didn't even have a place to sleep. "But I don't have money to buy the business," I stammered. "Who said anything about buying?" She smiled. "You'll pay with your work. I'll continue as a partner, receiving a percentage of the profits to complement my retirement. In exchange, you manage everything, do the sewing, attend to the clients. In 5 years, if all goes well, the atelier will be completely yours." It was an opportunity I never imagined having. The next day we signed a simple contract, drawn up by Mrs. Cecilia's nephew, who was a lawyer. The Cecilia Atelier would become Cecilia and Eleanor Atelier, and eventually just Eleanor Atelier. The following years were of intense but rewarding work. We expanded the business, hired 2 assistants, began offering sewing courses for young people in the neighborhood. My fame as a skilled seamstress grew, and soon we were serving some of the most influential families in the city. In 1968, 3 years after my arrival, I moved to my own apartment, small but mine. I decorated it with simple furniture, but each carefully chosen, each piece representing a personal achievement. A bookshelf for my books. My collection grew with each visit to the bookstore. A comfortable armchair for reading on rainy nights. Curtains I sewed myself with a delicate fabric that reminded me of the garden of my childhood. That same year, I received an unexpected letter. The envelope had the letterhead of Mitchell Industries, and my heart raced when I recognized it. For a moment, I feared it was from Arthur, perhaps seeking revenge after all those years. But the firm handwriting on the envelope was Alexander's. The letter was brief and formal. He informed me that, after the incident, as he called the scandal we caused, Arthur had completely distanced himself from the family. He had moved to Miami with Eleanor, apparently trying to rebuild his life away from his father and the family business. Alexander also wrote that he had reformed his will and left a considerable sum for me. "Not out of guilt or regret," he emphasized, "but because I recognize in you the strength and determination I always wished to see in my own son." I never replied to the letter, not out of resentment or hurt, but because that part of my life was over. I was a different woman now, building my own path, creating my own story. The 70s arrived, bringing changes to the country and to my personal life. America was experiencing the aftermath of the civil rights movement, but in big cities, women's movements were beginning to gain strength, questioning traditional roles, fighting for more rights. I found myself, almost without realizing it, involved in these discussions. It began when I transformed part of the atelier into a small living space where clients could have coffee while waiting for their fittings. There, naturally, conversations arose about women's situation in society. Many were like I had been, dependent on husbands, without a profession, accustomed to living in the shadow of a man. "How did you do it?" they would frequently ask me. "How did you have the courage to start over alone?" I didn't have ready answers, just my own experience to share, but I realized that my story, as painful as it was, could serve as inspiration for other women in similar situations. In 1972, I officially transformed the living space of the atelier into a small support center for women. On Saturday afternoons, we offered free basic sewing courses for low-income women, a skill that could guarantee some financial independence. On Wednesday nights, we organized discussion circles about women's rights, basic financial education, family planning. It wasn't a big or revolutionary movement. We were just a group of women trying to help other women find their own path. But for many who passed through that space, it was the beginning of a personal transformation. One of these women was Teresa, who came to the atelier in 1974, her face marked by bruises poorly disguised by makeup. "I just came to repair a dress," she said, but her downcast eyes and trembling hands told another story. I invited her for coffee, then to one of our discussion circles. At first, she just listened quietly in a corner. With time, she began to open up, to share her story. A violent husband, 2 small children, no professional training, the feeling of being trapped in a situation with no way out. "I also thought I had no way out," I told her one day. "I also thought my life was over when I found myself alone, but I discovered it was just the beginning." Teresa began to attend our sewing courses. She was talented, learned quickly. After 6 months, I offered her a job as an assistant at the atelier. A year later, she had separated from her abusive husband, rented a small apartment for herself and her children, and begun a new phase of her life. Stories like Teresa's multiplied over the years. Women who found in the atelier not just a place to repair clothes, but to rebuild lives. And in each of them, I saw a bit of myself, the frightened young woman who got off at that bus station years ago, not knowing where to go or what to do. In 1975, when the UN declared the International Year of Women, our small support center had already helped more than 200 women find work, housing, or simply the courage to take the first step toward independence. It was also in that year that I received the news of Alexander Mitchell's death, a sudden heart attack, according to the newspaper that published his obituary. I felt a strange melancholy reading the news, not exactly sadness, but a certain nostalgia for a time that seemed to have happened in another life. A few weeks later, I was contacted by a lawyer. As Alexander had mentioned in his letter years before, he had really left me a sum in his will, enough to buy a space of our own for the Women's Support Center, which until then operated in the back of the atelier. There was a certain poetic irony in that. The money from the man who helped me in a petty revenge would now serve to help other women rebuild their lives, find their independence, discover their own strength. The new center was inaugurated in 1976 in a renovated townhouse near the atelier. I called it New Beginnings House, a name that perfectly reflected its mission. There we expanded our services. Besides sewing courses, we offered typing classes, professional cooking, crafts. We had a small library, a room for children to play while their mothers studied, and even temporary rooms for women at risk. New Beginnings House became my greatest achievement, greater than the successful atelier, greater than the financial independence I achieved, greater than the respectability I gained in Philadelphia society. It was my legacy, the proof that even from the most painful experiences, something beautiful and meaningful can be born. I never married again. I had some relationships over the years, but none that made me want to give up the freedom I had won with so much effort. I didn't have biological children, but I consider as my daughters the hundreds of women who passed through New Beginnings House, especially those who, after rebuilding their own lives, came back to help others do the same. When I look back at that naive young woman I once was, who believed that revenge would bring some kind of satisfaction, I feel a mixture of compassion and gratitude. Compassion for the pain she felt, for the humiliation she faced, and gratitude that she found the courage to leave, to start over, to transform that pain into something positive. Revenge didn't bring me peace. What brought me peace was discovering my own strength, building a meaningful life, helping other women find their way. It was understanding that our true strength isn't in hurting those who hurt us, but in healing ourselves and extending a hand to those who are still hurting. The 80s arrived with their vibrant colors, lively music, and an America that was changing. I had already crossed the mark of 40 years, a mature woman, established, respected in Philadelphia, not just as the owner of Eleanor Atelier, but as the founder of New Beginnings House, which continued to grow and help more and more women. My hair, which was beginning to show the first silver strands, I wore it loose now, a small symbol of the freedom I had won. I no longer cared what people would think of a middle-aged woman who didn't follow traditional patterns. I had found my own definition of happiness. In 1983, New Beginnings House completed 7 years of existence. We organized a small celebration with the presence of women who had passed through there. Some at the beginning of their journey, others already completely transformed, with their own achievements to share. It was a sunny September afternoon, the townhouse garden decorated with colorful flowers, a table with treats prepared by our cooking course students. I was talking with Teresa, that same Teresa who had arrived years before, her face marked by bruises, and who now coordinated our professional courses, when I noticed a woman standing at the gate, observing the movement. Something about her seemed familiar, though I couldn't immediately identify who she was. I excused myself to Teresa and walked to the gate. As I approached, the sense of familiarity increased. And then, when we were face to face, separated only by the garden fence, I recognized those eyes, the same eyes that once looked at me with contempt in the living room of our house in Riverdale Springs. "Eleanor?" I asked incredulously. She nodded, a nervous smile on her lips painted light pink. She was older, of course. 18 years had passed since the scandal at Marianne's wedding. But she still maintained that elegance I remembered from the perfumed letters I found in Arthur's jacket. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice soft, almost shy. "I'd like to talk to you if you have a moment." I hesitated for an instant. What could Eleanor want with me after so many years? Was it some kind of trap? Was Arthur nearby, waiting for some kind of confrontation? But time had taught me not to let myself be dominated by fear. I opened the gate and invited her in. "We're celebrating the anniversary of New Beginnings House," I explained, leading her through the garden. "A project that helps women rebuild their lives." "I know," she replied to my surprise. "I read about your work in a newspaper article. That's how I discovered where to find you." I took her to my small office in the back of the townhouse where we could talk privately. I offered her coffee, which she accepted with a nod. While serving the cups, I observed her discreetly. She was well dressed, but not with the ostentatious luxury I imagined she would have as Arthur's wife. There was a certain tension in her shoulders, a fragility in the way she held her purse. "I imagine you're wondering what I'm doing here," she began after a sip of coffee. "The question crossed my mind," I admitted, sitting across from her. She took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "I came to thank you," she finally said. Of all the things I imagined she might say, that was the last. "Thank me for what?" "For leaving Arthur's life," she replied, surprising me even more. "If you hadn't done that, the scandal at the wedding, the revenge with his father, I would never have seen who he really was. I would probably still be trapped in a relationship that was slowly destroying me." I remained silent, trying to process those words. Eleanor continued. "After that day, Arthur changed, became bitter, suspicious, started drinking more than he should. He thought everyone was conspiring against him, especially after his father's death. He suspected I would betray him too, like you did. In his mind, of course." "I'm sorry," I murmured genuinely. She shook her head. "Don't be. It was the best thing that could have happened. It opened my eyes, showed me that the man I had fallen in love with didn't really exist." Eleanor then told me her story of the last 18 years. After the scandal, she and Arthur really moved to Miami, trying to escape the malicious comments in Riverdale Springs. They married a few months later in a discreet ceremony. For a while, things seemed good. Arthur got a job at an import company. They bought a small apartment in South Beach, tried to build a new life. But the shadow of his father and me, apparently, never stopped hanging over Arthur. When he learned of Alexander's death and discovered he had been excluded from the will, he sank completely into drinking and resentment. He began to miss work, to spend money on gambling, to come home drunk and violent. "At first, I thought it was just a phase," Eleanor explained, her eyes fixed on the coffee cup. "That he would overcome the pain of his father's rejection, that he would go back to being the man I fell in love with. But the years passed, and he only got worse." In 1980, after a particularly violent episode in which Arthur pushed her against a wall during an argument, Eleanor finally decided to leave. She took only some belongings and went to a friend's house. She filed for divorce, which Arthur fiercely contested, less out of love, she believed, and more out of wounded pride. "It was a long and painful process," she sighed. "He did everything to harm me, to leave me with nothing. But I had saved some money over the years, foreseeing that this day would come. I managed to start over." She returned to Pennsylvania, not to Riverdale Springs, but to Philadelphia, where she had a sister. She got a job as a saleswoman in a department store, took night courses in administration, slowly rebuilt her life. When I read about New Beginnings House in the newspaper, about how you helped women in difficult situations, something clicked inside me, she continued. I realized that I too had been one of those women, trapped in a toxic relationship, not seeing a way out. And in a way, you helped me escape, even without knowing it. I felt a strange emotion hearing that. I had never thought of Eleanor as a victim. In my mind, she was the other woman, the lover who stole my husband. But now, hearing her story, I realized we were more alike than I ever imagined. Both of us had been deceived by the same man. Both had suffered at his hands. Both had found the strength to start over. Do you know what happened to him? I asked, realizing I really wanted to know. Not out of anger or resentment, but out of an almost detached curiosity, like someone asking about a character from a book read long ago. Eleanor felt a shadow crossing her face. I heard from mutual acquaintances that he continued to decline. He lost his job, then the apartment. The last news I had was about 2 years ago. He was living in a boarding house room in a Miami suburb, still drinking a lot, blaming the world for his failures. I remained silent, absorbing that information. I didn't feel joy at Arthur's misfortune, as I might have years ago. Just a certain sadness for the wasted life, the lost potential. And you? Eleanor asked after a moment. How was your journey all these years? I then told her my own story. The arrival in Philadelphia with nothing, the work as a maid, meeting Mrs. Cecilia, the atelier, the creation of New Beginnings House. I omitted nothing, not even the less noble parts. The desire for revenge that consumed me, the plan with Alexander, how it all ended up teaching me that true liberation didn't come from hurting who hurt us, but from healing ourselves. When I finished, Eleanor had tears in her eyes. It's an incredible story, she said. You transformed your pain into something so beautiful, so meaningful. It wasn't easy, I admitted. There were days when I almost gave up, when the longing for a comfortable life was almost unbearable. But each step forward, each small achievement gave me strength to continue. We sat in silence for a moment. Two mature women reflecting on the winding paths that life had led us to travel. You know what's ironic? Eleanor finally said. We were both prisoners of the same man in different ways, and we both found our freedom by moving away from him. Maybe the real prison was never Arthur, I reflected, but the idea that we needed a man to define us, to give us value. She nodded, an understanding smile on her lips. Exactly. And that's what your work here does, shows women that their value doesn't depend on who is beside them, but on what they themselves are capable of building. That afternoon, Eleanor and I talked for hours, not as ex-wife and ex-lover, not as rivals, but as two survivors who found their own path. When she finally said goodbye, we exchanged addresses and promised to keep in touch. Who would have thought, she smiled at the gate, that one day we would be friends? Life has these ironies, I replied, returning the smile. In the years that followed, Eleanor became a constant presence at New Beginnings House. She started as a volunteer, helping with administrative work. Then she took over the coordination of a new program we created, financial counseling for newly separated women. Her own experience made her especially capable of understanding the challenges these women faced. In 1987, when the bicentennial of the Constitution was being celebrated, we became actively involved in mobilizations for women's rights. New Beginnings House organized debates, collected signatures for petitions, sent representatives to Washington to push for advances in legislation on domestic violence, labor rights for women, equality in marriage. It was a period of intense work, but also of great hopes. America was changing, and women, including those who passed through New Beginnings House, were helping to shape this new country. In 1990, at 47, I received an invitation I never would have expected. The city of Philadelphia wanted to honor me with the Civic Merit Medal in recognition of the work developed at New Beginnings House. The ceremony would be at City Hall, with the presence of authorities and the press. My first impulse was to refuse. I never sought public recognition for what I did. The gratitude in the eyes of the women we helped was reward enough. But Teresa and Eleanor convinced me to accept. "It's not for you," Teresa argued. "It's for all the women who pass through the house. It's a way to give visibility to the cause, to show that the work we do is important and deserves support." On the day of the ceremony, wearing a petrol blue dress that I designed and sewed myself, some skills never fade, I went up on stage to receive the medal. I looked at the audience and saw familiar faces: Teresa, Eleanor, some of the first women we helped, young people who grew up attending the house's courses, friends I made over the years. At that moment, I felt a wave of emotion invade me. I thought of the 22-year-old woman I had been, thrown into the world with nothing but the clothes on my back and a broken heart. I thought of the tortuous path I had traveled, the work as a maid, the nights of solitude, the small achievements that added up to bring me there. In my acceptance speech, I didn't mention Arthur or Alexander or the revenge I once planned. I talked about new beginnings, about the strength that all women have within them, even when they think they've lost everything. I talked about how our deepest wounds can be transformed into sources of healing for other people if we know how to transform pain into compassion. New beginnings. House is mine, I concluded. It's all the women who passed through there, who left a bit of themselves and took a bit of all of us. It's a testimony that it's never too late to start again, never too late to discover your own strength, never too late to transform your story. When I came down from the stage, I was received with emotional hugs. At that moment, I realized I had found something that money can't buy, that no man can give or take away: a purpose, a legacy, a family chosen by the heart. In the years that followed, New Beginnings House continued to grow. We opened a branch in another neighborhood, then in another city. Our service model began to be replicated by other organizations. We were invited to give lectures, to train teams, to share our experience. In 1994, I received news that closed a cycle. Arthur Mitchell had passed away, victim of liver cirrhosis, alone in a public hospital room in Miami. There was no family by his side, no friend to hold his hand in his final moments. I felt a deep sadness upon learning this, not for the man who betrayed and humiliated me, but for the waste of a life, the potential never realized, the demons he never managed to overcome. That night, I lit a candle for him, not out of love or longing, but out of compassion, and silently thanked for the path I had traveled since that night I was kicked out of the house. A difficult path, no doubt, filled with obstacles and moments of despair, but a path that led me to discover a strength I never imagined I possessed, to build something meaningful, to touch the lives of hundreds of women. If I could go back in time and talk to that young Eleanor, crying at the Philadelphia bus station, I would tell her, "Don't be afraid. The pain you feel now will pass. And on the other side of that pain, there is a life so full, so meaningful that you can barely imagine. A life that will be entirely yours, built with your own hands." And now, at 82, looking at the path traveled, at the lives I helped transform, at the legacy I built, I know I wouldn't change anything, not even the most painful moments, because it was exactly that journey, with all its ups and downs, that transformed me into the woman I am today. A woman who learned that the true revenge against those who hurt us is not to cause them pain, but to build a life so full and meaningful that the wound becomes just a distant scar, a reminder of our own resilience. A woman who discovered that our value doesn't come from who is beside us, but from what we are capable of building with our own hands and hearts. A woman who finally understood that sometimes we need to lose everything to find what really matters. And if that's the lesson you take from my story today, then it will have been worth sharing. Because in the end, it's not our falls that define who we are, but how we choose to rise after them. And so, my dears, I come to the end of this story that I've kept for so many years. I hope it can serve as inspiration for those going through difficult times, through betrayals, through new beginnings. Before I say goodbye, I'd like to ask you to leave your like on this video, if my story touched your heart. Subscribe to the channel too, so you don't miss the next stories I'll share with you. Turn on notifications to be notified whenever there's a new story. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to start from zero sometime in your life? What was your experience like? I love reading your comments and knowing a little bit about the story of each one who watches me. Thank you for listening to me today. God bless each one of you. Until the next story.